Knoxville sits in a valley surrounded by the Smoky Mountains. Sounds beautiful, right? And it is. Until you realize that the same geography that makes it scenic also makes it a trap. Literally. And that's just the beginning of what the mountains are hiding. Because here's the thing. On paper, Knoxville looks incredible. Craft breweries on every corner, revitalized downtown with trendy restaurants, hiking trails minutes from your door, and housing that won't destroy your bank account. At least compared to what you're probably moving from. And sure, all of that exists. But here's what they don't put in the brochures. Knoxville is a city designed for people who aren't planning to stay. It's a city that serves tourists, students, and transplants cycling through every few years while the people who've lived here for generations get slowly pushed to the margins. And if you move here expecting anything different, you're in for a very expensive surprise. Let's start with the most obvious problem. Housing. You've probably heard that Knoxville is affordable. And compared to Austin, Denver, or Nashville, sure. The median home price in Knoxville hovers around $360,000, which sounds reasonable if you're coming from a market where that won't even get you a one-bedroom condo. But here's the thing. The median household income in Knoxville is just $50,994. That means the average home costs over 7 times the average annual income, which for those keeping track, is well above the threshold where housing experts start waving red flags. For locals who've lived here their entire lives, who work at the university or in service jobs downtown, buying a home has become functionally impossible, and it's getting worse. Between 2020 and 2024, Knoxville's housing prices increased by over 70%. Not because wages went up, they didn't. Not because the city built more affordable housing, it absolutely did not. But because remote workers from California, New York, and Washington started flooding in during the pandemic, armed with big city salaries and zero concept of what housing should cost in East Tennessee. For them, $350,000 for a renovated bungalow in Sequoia Hills feels like a steal. For the person who grew up here and works at a local hospital making $45,000 a year, it might as well be $1 million. This is what's called economic displacement, and Knoxville is experiencing it at breakneck speed. Entire neighborhoods that used to house working-class families are now full of transplants who can afford to outbid everyone else. And the people who built this city, who've lived here for decades, are getting priced out to the suburbs, to the outskirts, and to surrounding counties where the infrastructure is even worse. Which brings us to the next problem, and this one is more literal than you might think. Knoxville sits in the Tennessee Valley, hemmed in on all sides by the Appalachian Mountains. It's one of the most beautiful settings for a city you'll ever see. But here's what valleys actually do. They trap things. And in Knoxville's case, what they trap is air pollution. The city suffers from what's known as temperature inversion, where warm air sits on top of cooler air in the valley, creating a lid that prevents pollutants from escaping. Every car emission, every industrial facility, every wildfire burning in the Smokies, all of it gets trapped and concentrated in the valley where everyone lives. For people with asthma, COPD, or other respiratory conditions, living in Knoxville means constantly checking the air quality index before going outside. It means keeping inhalers close during the summer months when ozone levels peak. And it means knowing that every year you live here, your lungs are taking a beating you can't see. What makes it worse is that many people who move to Knoxville develop allergies for the first time in their lives. You could live your entire existence never sneezing, never needing antihistamines, and then 6 months after moving to East Tennessee, you're walking around with itchy eyes and a box of tissues. But the geography doesn't just trap air, it also limits expansion. Knoxville can't really sprawl the way other Sunbelt cities do because it's physically constrained by mountains, which sounds like good urban planning until you realize it means infrastructure bottlenecks. There are exactly 2 major corridors in and out of the city. I-40 running east-west and I-75 running north-south. During rush hour, both turn into parking lots. The average commute time in Knoxville is 21.5 minutes, which doesn't sound terrible until you consider that the city is geographically small. People aren't commuting from far away. They're just sitting in traffic because there aren't enough routes to distribute the load. And public transportation is essentially non-existent. Knoxville Area Transit operates a handful of bus routes that mostly serve students and low-income residents who have no other options. If you don't have a car in Knoxville, you're functionally isolated, which is fine if you're a transplant with a reliable vehicle and a remote job. It's a disaster if you're working 2 service jobs and can't afford car ownership. Speaking of disasters, let's talk about what the city actually looks like once you leave the downtown core. Knoxville loves to market itself as this cohesive, revitalized city, and if you only ever visit the market square or the old city, you might actually believe it. There's vintage shops, farm-to-table restaurants, microbreweries with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the full gentrification starter pack. But drive 10 minutes east into East Knoxville or north into Lonsdale, and you're in a completely different city. One with boarded-up buildings, food deserts, and a poverty rate hovering around 35%, nearly triple the national average. Knox County as a whole has a poverty rate of 12.6%, but that number is heavily skewed by the wealthier western suburbs. Within Knoxville city limits, especially in the historically black neighborhoods that the city has systematically neglected for decades, the poverty rate climbs much higher. While developers are building luxury apartments downtown with rooftop pools and co-working spaces, entire neighborhoods less than 2 miles away don't have a single grocery store. The city government has made a lot of noise about revitalization and economic development, but what that actually means is funneling money into the parts of town that already have money. The parts where tourists go, the parts where transplants live, the parts that have been struggling for generations, they get a few hastily painted murals and a promise that things will get better. Eventually. Maybe. And when people in those neighborhoods get sick, which happens a lot, given the poverty, the food deserts, the pollution, and the lack of preventative care, they face another nightmare: healthcare access. Knoxville has exactly one major hospital system, the University of Tennessee Medical Center. It's a level 1 trauma center, and by all accounts, if you're critically injured, it's where you want to be. But if you're dealing with chronic illness, mental health issues, or addiction, which are far more common than traumatic injuries, your options narrow considerably. And rural hospitals in surrounding countries? Closing at an alarming rate. Since 2010, over 20 rural hospitals in Tennessee have shut down, leaving massive gaps in coverage. This is what happens when a city grows rapidly without investing in the infrastructure to support that growth. And it's what happens when the people making decisions don't actually live in the places that need the most help. Which brings us to perhaps the most frustrating part of living in Knoxville. Nobody sticks around long enough to fix anything. Knoxville is a college town. The University of Tennessee enrolls over 33,000 students, and those students cycle through every 4 years, replacing themselves with a new batch who also don't have any long-term investment in the city's future. They live here, they party here, they attend football games at Neyland Stadium, and then they leave. The same is true for a chunk of the workforce. Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one of the largest employers in the region, brings in researchers and scientists on temporary contracts. They stay for a few years, then move on. The tourism industry churns through seasonal workers who have no stability, no benefits, and no reason to stay once the season ends. Even the transplants who moved here during the pandemic, a lot of them are already talking about leaving. Because once you actually live in Knoxville for a while, once the novelty of cheap rent and mountain views wears off, you start noticing all the things that don't work. The traffic, the air quality, the lack of public services, the weird political dynamics. And when no one stays, no one has an incentive to invest in long-term solutions. City leadership changes constantly. Neighborhood organizations struggle to maintain continuity. Major infrastructure projects get proposed, debated, and then quietly shelved when the political winds shift. Knoxville has been planning to expand public transit for over a decade. Nothing has happened. The city has been addressing affordable housing for years. Prices keep rising. There's been talk of improving air quality monitoring and pollution controls. Still waiting. This transience creates a city that's perpetually stuck in neutral, where every problem is someone else's problem, and the people who suffer the most are the ones who can't afford to leave. So, who is Knoxville actually built for? The answer becomes pretty clear when you look at where the money goes. Knoxville's economy runs on 3 things: the university, tourism, and service industry jobs that support both. The University of Tennessee is the largest employer in the region, and it caters out-of-state students who pay premium tuition. Meanwhile, the tourism economy revolves around Gatlinburg and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is less than an hour away. Knoxville positions itself as a base camp for people visiting the mountains. Hotels, restaurants, breweries, they're all designed to extract money from people passing through. And the people working those jobs? They're making an average of $13 to $15 an hour in a city where rent for a 1-bedroom apartment now averages over $1,200 a month. Do the math. That's nearly impossible without roommates, second jobs, or government assistance. So you have a city that markets itself as affordable and welcoming, but the actual economy is built on underpaying the people who make it function. And if you think you could just vote for better policies, well, that's where things get even more frustrating. Tennessee operates under a strong state preemption system, which means the state legislature in Nashville can and regularly does override local city decisions. Knoxville's city government might want to raise the minimum wage, expand tenant protections, or invest in public transportation. Doesn't matter. If the state doesn't like it, they can block it. And Tennessee's state legislature is one of the most conservative in the country. Even though Knoxville itself leans more moderate, the state government reflects the rural, deeply conservative counties that dominate Tennessee's political landscape. So Knoxville ends up in this bizarre position where the people living here might want progressive politics, but they have almost no power to implement them. This is what it actually means to live in Knoxville. You're living in a city that doesn't really control its own future. Look, Knoxville isn't necessarily a terrible place to live, but it's not the affordable paradise the marketing materials make it out to be either. And if you're considering moving here, you deserve to know what you're actually getting into, not just the curated version designed to attract tourists and remote workers. If you found this helpful, or if you want to see more honest breakdowns of cities people are moving to, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps the channel, and there's a lot more of these coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.